Brandon knew he should have kept walking. Just 5 more steps to the loading dock, a quick toss of the trash bag, and the rest of the night would have passed like every other. Dim lights, half-stocked shelves, security cameras humming softly, in the silence. But instead he froze, not because of what he saw, but because of what he heard. Something so sharp and personal, it sliced straight through the dull routine of corporate obedience. A voice, whispered, low, too deliberate to be a mistake. He doesn't know who you are. No one was near him. No one should have been near him. The parking lot was empty. The only other person on shift, Tiffany, the closing manager, was still inside, arguing over headset with someone in the back office. And yet, the words had weight, real enough to feel like breath against his ear. It didn't feel like an insult. It felt like a warning. You're not watching a story. You're watching what Brandon's body cam picked up. Footage we weren't meant to have, filed under a mislabeled drive folder the legal team never scrubbed. This isn't viral for the reason you think. The title is a decoy, a bait tag, the real. Footage starts exactly here, at the 15-second mark when Brandon turns around, slow, confused, checking behind the dumpsters. Nothing. And then the sound again. Not a whisper this time. A name. Raymond. Spoken by someone who wasn't supposed to exist. He hadn't said that name in over 2 decades. Not since the day his uncle disappeared without a trace. You can hear his breathing shift. He doesn't even realize the trash bag is slipping from his hands. The camera angle jerks slightly. He's backing up now toward the employee entrance, not running, but not calm either. And then a shadow. Right in the camera's periphery. A figure, blurry, standing perfectly still just beyond the light pole. Blink and you'll miss it. But freeze frame at 0028 and you'll see. The figure isn't facing Brandon. It's facing you. That's when Tiffany's voice breaks in through the headset. Brandon, who the hell are you talking to? But his mic is muted. He doesn't respond. Because he's not hearing Tiffany anymore, he's hearing the voice again, clearer this time, like it's inside his head, and just outside the camera frame at once. He replaced you. Watch his eyes. This is the part no one's been able to explain. He stops blinking. For 8 straight seconds, he stares at nothing. Mouth slightly open, expression frozen. Not confused, not scared. Erased. That's the exact moment Tiffany opens the back door and finds only a single trash bag. No Brandon. Corporate said he walked off the job. They fired Tiffany on the spot for aggression toward a high-level guest. She never found out who the guest was. But when she played back the security feed before they wiped her access, she found something they missed. At the 2-minute mark in the loading dock footage, there's a voice. Not Brandon's. Not hers, male, unfamiliar. But the cadence, the accent, the way it breaks on the 3rd syllable, it was the voice of Brandon's uncle, Raymond Mathers, presumed dead since 2004, and he says one thing. Check his eyes. He was never supposed to see me. The screen goes black for a moment, just long enough to feel wrong, long enough to make you ask, who was Brandon before he disappeared? And more importantly, who's wearing his name tag now? The black screen hung there like a breath caught in the throat, too long to be a mistake, too deliberate to ignore. And then, slowly, the feed returned. But something was different. The timestamp stuttered, skipping frames. The audio warping as if the footage itself was resisting being seen. It wasn't just a recording anymore. It was a puzzle with pieces missing. Edges blurred, colors bleeding where they shouldn't. Brandon's face flickered in and out, a strobe of confusion and silence, like a broken reflection in shattered glass. It was impossible to tell if he was there, or if he was just a ghost of memory left behind by a mind unraveling. The more you looked, the less you understood. How could someone just vanish? And what did that name, Raymond, really mean when it echoed in the spaces between his breaths? The truth didn't come in a tidy package, wrapped and labeled. It came in fragments, audio glitches that whispered, just out of earshot, voices, layered beneath voices, as if the tape was hiding more than it was showing. "They don't want you to remember," one breathy voice said, barely audible over the static. Another cut in, sharper, colder. "What if the eyes lied?" And in between, silence. Heavy, suffocating, pregnant with things that no one dared say aloud. That's when Sarah stepped into the frame. Not on the footage, but in the follow-up interviews, the news clips, the small-town murmurs that circled like vultures hungry for meaning. She was Brandon's therapist, or maybe just someone who claimed to be. A slender woman with sharp eyes that didn't quite meet yours, and a voice too smooth to be entirely sincere. She spoke of Brandon's delusions, of stress-induced hallucinations, of memories reconstructing themselves in dangerous ways. She insisted the uncle was a ghost from his fractured past, a childhood trauma bleeding into his present, nothing supernatural, just the cruel trick of a mind desperate for answers it couldn't find. But here's the rub. Sarah's own story didn't add up. Footage caught her visiting the store the day after Brandon disappeared. She was seen talking quietly to Tiffany, who swore under oath that Sarah seemed different, distant, even cold. Like she was hiding something, Tiffany said. Like she knew more than she let on. And then, in a way that twisted the knife deeper, Sarah denied ever meeting Tiffany that day. Said it was a case of mistaken identity. The world Brandon left behind felt slippery, like stepping into a dream where the ground gives way beneath your feet. Memories slipped through fingers like smoke. His own interviews full of gaps, moments where he couldn't remember where he was, or why the manager had called his name out with such hostility before everything went dark. Something was wrong. With the tape, with the story, with Brandon himself. Was he a victim, a liar, or something else entirely? The harder the town searched for answers, the more the silence screamed back. Hidden recordings surfaced, capturing moments between Brandon and Sarah that made less and less sense. There was a file, a corrupted one recovered from a crashed laptop that contained a voice memo. The voice was unmistakable, but the words made no sense. She watches through the eyes that aren't his. The truth is buried in what they don't want you to remember. No one could say what that meant. Not even Sarah, whose reassurances began to sound like riddles. Her gaze would flicker sometimes, caught in that strange place between empathy and calculation, as if she was both helping Brandon and hiding him from something far worse. And then, the quietest detail that changed everything. Tiffany's badge found months later in a dumpster behind the store, with Brandon's name scratched crudely into the back. Who was Brandon, really? What had he uncovered? Was it a secret that shattered the thin line between reality and madness? Or was it madness itself, dressed in the guise of truth? The unsettling answer is that no one knows. Not yet. All we have are fragments, whispers, static, shadows in the corner of your eye, and the overwhelming feeling that something is watching. Always watching. And maybe, just maybe, the reason Brandon disappeared isn't because he left. Maybe it's because he was never meant to be found at all. Brandon's hands trembled as he held the folder, its edges worn from desperate flipping, as if the paper itself bore the weight of all he had yet to understand. For the first time since that night at the loading dock, a sharp thread of hope sliced through the fog of confusion, the kind that felt real, tangible, like the hidden truth, might finally break free from the shadows it had been shackled to. The file was labeled Raymond Mathers Incident Report 2004, its date perfectly aligning with the day his uncle vanished, the day his family had been told to forget. What he read felt like a key, confessions hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic jargon, a report that spoke of a cover-up, of unexplained disappearances linked to a quiet, small town with a dark heart. A name appeared repeatedly, someone who had been pulling strings from the background, a figure tangled in every rumor Brandon had tried to ignore but never could. The pieces seemed to fall into place. The voice on the footage, the cryptic whispers, even Sarah's strange behavior. Everything pointed to a man named Harris, a name Brandon had heard only in passing, associated with whispers of experiments, of memory manipulations, and of people erased without a trace. According to the report, Harris had been involved in psychological conditioning programs disguised as employee wellness initiatives, targeting vulnerable workers under the guise of corporate compliance. Brandon felt his breath catch. The unnerving parallels between his experience and what had been happening 2 decades before were too stark to dismiss. The evidence was damning. The truth was finally within reach. He contacted a journalist he trusted, someone who had covered real, unsolved mysteries with the kind of grit that made you believe the story wasn't just sensationalism, but a quest for justice. Together, they mapped out the connections, found witnesses willing to talk under the veil of anonymity, and even uncovered security logs showing Harris visiting the very store where Brandon had worked, under different names, years apart. The journalists' recordings captured interviewees who spoke of something watching, a presence that wasn't human but always there, altering memories and silencing questions. The pieces clicked. The nightmare was no accident. It was engineered, orchestrated by a force that bent reality like it was a toy. But then, the unexpected came. As Brandon replayed the security footage one more time, looking for the definitive proof, his eyes caught a detail he'd never noticed before. At exactly 2 minutes and 47 seconds, right after Tiffany's badge appeared in the dumpster, a flicker on the corner of the screen, a reflection in a cracked window, showing a figure, standing behind the camera. It was blurred but unmistakably human. The face was too familiar. It was his own. But not just his. It was a version of himself that didn't belong here, eyes hollow and distant, a smile that didn't reach the lips. The room tilted. The folder slipped from his hands, pages scattering like lost memories. This wasn't a man hunting a secret anymore. This was a man being hunted by himself. That's when it hit him, the memory glitch. The flashes of his childhood that had always felt like broken records. A forgotten Christmas morning where his mother whispered frantic warnings he never understood. The distant screams muffled beneath the hum of static on an old television. The man in the shadows who wasn't his father, but who watched over him with empty eyes. The stories his family buried. Stories about the town itself. Stories that warned, don't trust what you see. Don't trust what you feel. They're always watching. A cold wave of realization washed over Brandon. Whatever force had taken his uncle had silenced Tiffany, and had twisted his own reality was far older and deeper than a simple corporate conspiracy. It had been watching from the beginning, lurking in the cracks of memory and the spaces between truths, waiting for someone to notice. And now, it had found him. His phone buzzed. A notification from Sarah. A message he never expected. We need to talk? You're not crazy. But this isn't what you think. And with that, the fragile illusion shattered completely. Because if Brandon was both hunter and hunted, if the memories he'd pieced together were riddled with gaps and shadows, then everything he'd believed, the footage, the voices, the evidence, had to be questioned. Was the truth something he was chasing, or something they had planted inside his mind? The story didn't end with answers. It ended with questions that clawed at the edges of sanity, with the terrifying possibility that the biggest mystery wasn't out there in the dark corners of that store or in the files locked away, but inside his own fractured mind. As the screen fades to black once again, the fear settles in like a second skin. You're not crazy. They lied to you. And maybe, just maybe, you need to watch it all again. Because the truth isn't hidden in what you saw. It's hidden in what you missed. They say the shadows are where the truth hides, but it turns out the shadows aren't empty. They're crowded. Brandon was never alone. The unsettling realization creeps in like a cold fog seeping under a cracked door. Others have been caught in this web, tangled in the same silent nightmare, watching the same unraveling story with different eyes, different fragments of memory, but all marked by the same invisible hand. You weren't supposed to see this. But maybe, just maybe, you were right all along. Across cities, towns, places you'd never expect, people start waking up with the same fractured recollections, The same haunting name whispered in the dark, Raymond. They don't know each other, but the memories overlap like ghostly echoes, fragments of a reality that refuses to stay fixed, slipping through time like water through fingers. Some speak of shared dreams, scenes playing out beneath their eyelids, with perfect clarity. Faces they can't place, words they can't speak aloud, symbols scratched into walls or flickering on forgotten televisions. And the symbols, those indecipherable shapes and patterns, sometimes flicker in the corner of your screen if you watch long enough, flashing just fast enough to catch your eye, as if the story itself is trying to reach out, communicate, and pull you in deeper, and you do feel it. The weight of something watching, always watching, a presence that doesn't belong to any one person, a force that moves between minds, between realities. It's a gaze so heavy it bends the edges of what you think you know about yourself, your memories, your identity, your very sense of control. It's like waking up one day and realizing the reflection staring back isn't quite yours. The memories you cherish, the truths you hold on to, might be someone else's. Planted, edited, twisted. Then there's her. The observer who whispers through the static, the only one who dares to speak the language of what is. She calls herself Eleanor, but no one knows if that's her real name or just another mask. What's certain is her voice, low, urgent, soaked in the kind of knowledge that comes from surviving too long inside a system designed to erase you. She isn't just watching the story unfold, she's been watching them. She appears in grainy videos, clipped audio, cryptic blog posts, dropped in forgotten corners of the internet, warning that the events surrounding Brandon, Raymond, and the unseen force are only the surface. Eleanor talks about found footage from 20 years ago, tapes never officially released, evidence the government buried beneath layers of redaction and silence. She speaks of experiments not on the body, but on the mind, of memory manipulation, and identity theft at scales so vast they shatter everything you thought you understood about free will. But she doesn't just lay it all out in the open. Her messages come in riddles, puzzles wrapped inside other puzzles, designed to pull you deeper into the conspiracy without ever fully revealing it. What they don't want you to remember, she writes, is that you're not alone. We are all fragments of a story too dangerous to tell. This isn't just about Brandon, or his uncle, or even the twisted corporate corridors where they vanished. This is about the slow erosion of self, the quiet takeover of the mind by forces, too intangible to fight, forces that erase and rewrite memory like a corrupted file, that twist perception until reality itself is suspect. Eleanor warns that the watchers don't just observe, they control. And control is the most intimate form of violence there is, seeping into your dreams, your thoughts, your fears, until you can't tell where you end and the influence begins. But the deeper you go, the more you question. If the memories are lies, who decides what's real? If identities can be rewritten, what does it mean to be someone? And if the watchers have been here all along, pulling strings beneath the surface of everyday life, how much of your own story has already been altered without your knowing? And yet, despite the dread, despite the fractures in your mind, the unease curling like smoke in your chest, you feel it. The electric charge of revelation, the pulse of connection to something larger than yourself, to others who have glimpsed the hidden machinery and refused to look away. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the real reckoning. A vast, silent war over the essence of who we are, fought in shadows and whispers, in glitches and forgotten memories. Eleanor's final message flickers on the screen. Watch closely. Listen harder. The next piece is closer than you think. They're always watching. Are you ready to be seen? And with that, the screen fades, leaving you suspended in the quiet storm of questions, charged with a terrifying certainty. The story isn't just unfolding, it's unfolding around you. Brandon stood alone in the dim light of the abandoned office, the cold seeping into his bones not from the winter outside, but from the weight of everything he'd uncovered, and everything he still couldn't grasp. The folders, the tapes, the cryptic messages from Eleanor, the whispers of memory fractures, the shadowed presence watching from the edges of his own mind, All of it had led here, to this quiet moment of reckoning. The question was no longer what had happened to him, or to his uncle, or to Tiffany. It was why. Why this nightmare was stitched into the very fabric of his existence, why the boundaries between reality and illusion were bleeding together until they were indistinguishable. There's a rawness to truth that cuts deeper than any blade, a vulnerability that leaves you naked before the universe. Brandon felt it now, the terrifying clarity that the greatest mystery wasn't a secret buried in files or whispered names, but a reflection staring back at him from the darkest corners of his soul. The watchers, the manipulation, the fractured memories, they were symptoms, echoes of a deeper human fear. The fear that our lives, ourselves, can be taken from us, rewritten by forces beyond our control. That our identity, the stories we cling to as proof we exist, might be fragile illusions crafted by something cold and unfeeling. In that moment, Brandon realized the choice before him was not between truth and lies, but between surrender and survival. To embrace the terrifying revelation that his memories could betray him, that his sense of self might be a constructed lie, and to find freedom in that uncertainty. Or to retreat into denial, clinging to fractured shards of a past that might never have been his to begin with. His voice trembled as he spoke aloud, a confession born from years of silence and fear. Maybe the person I thought I was never existed. Maybe all this, the footage, the voices, the pain, it's a story someone else wrote for me. The words hung in the air, raw and unpolished. A moment of total vulnerability that stripped away every mask he'd worn. But beneath that confession was a glimmer of hope. Fragile but real. The possibility that in losing what he thought was himself, he could find something stronger. A truth that transcended memory and identity. A connection to something greater than the sum of his fears and doubts. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. And then a soft, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper carried on the cold air. You're not alone. Not from a ghost or a shadow, but from within. A voice that felt like his own, yet wiser, older, unbound by fear. And suddenly, the nightmare flipped. The watchers weren't just agents of erasure. They were mirrors, forcing him to confront the fragile beauty of being human. The impermanence, the uncertainty, the constant flux between forgetting and remembering. Losing and finding. The mystery was never about what they did to him, but about what he could do with the fragments left behind. How he could reclaim himself not by resisting the darkness, but by accepting it as part of the story. As the screen slowly faded, the final words lingered, poetic, haunting, impossible to shake. Sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones we carry inside, and the darkest truths aren't those they hide from us, but those we hide from ourselves. The room fell silent, but the story didn't end. It whispered forward, waiting, always waiting, for those willing to listen deeper, to question harder, to see beyond the veil. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.